Just when the offseason was getting quiet and there wasn't really anything going on regarding Memphis Grizzlies basketball, boom! The Memphis Grizzlies have waived the player. Now they have an open roster spot. What will they do with that roster spot? Will they go out and sign a player? Is there another trade on the way? Or are they just going to stay calm and keep it cool? You know what? We got some answers. So stay tuned for that here on Locked On Grizzlies.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am your host today, Damichael Cole, beat writer for the Commercial Appeal right here in Memphis, Tennessee. Going solo today without my co-host, Joe Mullinax, getting a well-deserved day off on today. So you're stuck with me. But that's cool, right? Cool. All right. So today's episode, look, before we get into all the good things that we're going to talk about today, because we got a jam-packed and juicy episode for you today. Remember that you can get Locked On Grizzlies anywhere you listen, anywhere you watch podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube. The list goes on. Locked On Grizzlies is there. Make sure you continue to like, rate, comment, subscribe, and tell a friend. Shout out to the everydayers out there, and shout out to the Memphis lands as well. I talk about all the listeners that we get from all these different places, but shout out to the Memphis love as well, because it always comes back to me. And people say, oh, Michael, someone told me that they listen to the podcast and they appreciate what you're doing and all those good things. Appreciate it and love all those things. So make sure you guys continue tuning in with us and let us know how you feel, what you think about the podcast as we continue to kind of make the best podcast for the consumers out there. But with all that being said, today's episode, we got a lot to talk about. If you're looking at it on YouTube, you see our show breakdown. If you're not looking on YouTube, and we're going to break it down for you here right now. We're going to talk about the Grizzlies waiving Mamadi Diakite, what that means for the roster. In the second segment, we're going to talk about the roster spot options now that the Grizzlies have an open roster spot. Make sure you stay tuned for that second segment, because I have a definitive answer on what I believe the Grizzlies should do next. So make sure you stay tuned for hear that as well. And then in the third segment, I'm going to talk about Ziaire Williams. Ziaire Williams finally made his first public comments since being traded from the Memphis Grizzlies. So we're going to talk about that as well and break down what he said. And we're going to talk about all of that here on today's show. But we got to start off by talking about the player that Ziaire Williams was traded for. Mamadi Diakite came from the Brooklyn Nets to the Memphis Grizzlies. Ziaire Williams was traded from the Grizzlies to the Brooklyn Nets. Now, at the time of the trade, we talked about it on here, and as many of us know, Mamadi Diakite was more of kind of a salary filler, a throw-in. We know the Grizzlies are trying to stay below the luxury tax. Ziaire Williams projected to make over $6 million this upcoming season. It made all the sense in the world to move Ziaire Williams from that standpoint. But we want to focus on Mamadi Diakite. If you look at his career, 55 career games played, over 3 points per game, 2 rebounds per game. Nothing really stand out about him. I know that's one of Joe Mullinax's guys. He's a Wahoo. He's one of those University of Virginia tough guys. But there really wasn't a fit for him in Memphis. And if you looked at it from the beginning, this was just all about the money. And it was sooner or later, it was going to happen. We've reported, I've reported through Commercial Appeal, and I've also said it here on Locked On Grizzlies. So shout out to the everydayers who've been listening. But said for a while that the Grizzlies, they have this preference right now of being at 14 players to give them flexibility. Maybe talk about that a little bit more later. But that's kind of the thing that I was reporting. Remember when the Luke Kennard situation was going on and the Grizzlies were already at 14 players? The thought was at some point they want to get back down to 14 after they signed Luke Kennard and he became the 15th player. Well, after they signed Luke Kennard, and he became the 15th player or whatever. Well, Mamadi Diakite is now waived, which gives the Grizzlies 14 players on the standard contracts. So that was kind of the main takeaway. I think everyone wants to focus on that part of it. Again, the main reason that the Grizzlies did this, there's no fit for Mamadi Diakite here. He's a 3-4. The Grizzlies have a bunch of those. They have a bunch of guys, whether it's Gigi Jackson, Vince Williams, John Conchar, Jaren Jackson Jr., Santi Aldama. The Grizzlies, even Marcus Smart, who's a guard naturally, but is going to spend a lot of time guarding those bigger forwards in certain matchups. Desmond Bane is another guy who might share the floor with Luke Kennard in situations and other guards, and he's going to bump down to the 3 in situations. The point being, the Grizzlies have a lot of guys who can play in between the 3 and the 4. Like, they might have some depth issues at the other spots, point guard, center. We talked about that a little bit, but there are not depth issues when it comes to the 2, 3, and 4 spots. A bunch of different guys, a bunch of different bodies, and at the end of the day, it's a numbers game. And if you looked at it simply from the fact that Ziaire Williams, who was basically not having a role in Memphis anymore because of the fact that other players have passed him up, there was no way that Mamadi Diakite, who hasn't even produced to the level of Ziaire Williams in his NBA career, was going to really find a role here in Memphis. So there are also reports out there, I believe through the Daily Memphian as well, that the Grizzlies plan to waive and stretch Mamadi Diakite. And that makes a lot of sense, to me as well. Mamadi Diakite is not making, he's pretty much on a minimum deal. But if you waive and stretch, because the deadline was coming up for waiving and stretching players, we've seen a couple other NBA teams use the waive and stretch provision as of late as well. I think a couple teams come to mind. I think the Phoenix Suns did it with Nasir Little, a couple days ago. And there was another team that did as well. I'm blanking on it. But the Grizzlies joined in on that group and kind of used their waive and stretch on Mamadi Diakite. This allows them to continue to hover right under the luxury tax. Remember, we talked about how the Grizzlies are kind of just trying to sneak their way into the luxury tax right now. And that's important, for a bunch of reasons. The main reason that I continue to outline that is important is because the Grizzlies' number won't be final until after the February trade deadline. And what I mean by that, their salary cap number, their financial number, how much they go over the salary cap, if they dip into the luxury tax, none of it will be final until post-trade deadline. So the fact that they're trying to stay under the luxury tax, like, it's very clear that the Grizzlies are trying to stay under the luxury tax by any means necessary at this point. Like, it just doesn't make sense that they would do all of this, cap, ducking and dodging right now just to, sign, a couple players for now and then boom, go right $2 million over the luxury tax. Like, it doesn't make much sense. So with all that being said, I feel like they're setting up for a situation where they can have some optionality where you say, if we suck this season or if guys get injured, then hey, at least we stayed under the luxury tax. But if we're really good, if we're that team that we think we can be, and we're one piece, we need to add that one little piece at the trade deadline where we might have to go in the luxury tax to get them, but it's going to increase our championship chances. Let's do it. So I think they're right in that in between. And I think that's a good spot for a team who's coming off a season like the Grizzlies just had and have all these questions, mainly centered around health, but there's some fit questions as well. But when all those questions get answered, it's going to come down simply to the fact of, should we go for it or should we just play it cool? And I think those answers will happen during the regular season. So the Grizzlies are putting themselves in a good position using the waive and stretch on Mamadi Diakite. I think they'll pay him now over the next 3 years, at a reduced amount. And that kind of lessens the financial blow from the standpoint of how it impacts, the salary cap and the Grizzlies' ability to stay below the luxury tax. So smart move by the Grizzlies. You open up a roster spot and you still stay below the luxury tax. 14 spots available on the Grizzlies roster right now. So now the question is, there's 14 spots taken up on the Grizzlies roster. That means they have one more because all 3 of the two-way contracts are taken up as well. The Grizzlies have an open roster spot. What do they do with that? We're going to talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But before we get to that, today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED lights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Coming up here on Locked On Grizzlies, I got a definitive statement to make. The Grizzlies have one open roster spot available. I feel like I know what they should do with that spot. So let's talk about that here next on Locked On Grizzlies. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies, everyone. I'm Damichael Cole, beat writer of Commercial Appeal, right here in Memphis, Tennessee. Talking all things Memphis Grizzlies with you on today's show. Again, just going solo without my co-host Joe Mullinax. But we talked about Mamadi Diakite in the first segment a little bit, the wave and stretch that the Grizzlies are planning to use, kind of ducking the luxury tax a little bit longer. And now they have one open roster spot. Like, I think if they didn't care about the idea of opening this roster spot, they would have just kept Mamadi Diakite, and he just been sitting on the end of the bench handing out some high fives. But now you give yourself a little bit of flexibility here. And now the question is, when do the Grizzlies want to punch their ticket? Or how do the Grizzlies want to punch their ticket? Because that's something you got to think about too. How do the Grizzlies want to punch this ticket? I think there are three ways the Grizzlies can approach this final roster spot. And I'm going to give you my answer after I break down the three ways, because I want to hear what you guys think too. When you hear these three options, I want to see what you guys think. But here's where I stand right here. We're going to talk about the three ways that I see. One of the ways is promote one of the guys on a two-way contract. You got Cam Spencer, you got Scottie Pippen Jr., and you got Jay Huff. Cam Spencer, as much as many of you like him, and I've had people texting me about Cam Spencer, like, man, he could really shoot it. He fits here. He makes the least sense to bring up from that perspective, from a two-way contract to a standard deal, simply because he's a rookie, which means you could have him for multiple years on a two-way contract. So I think his second season, unless he's just shooting the ball out of the water and you need him for the playoffs, because that is the one downside to the two-way contract. Not only are guys, they can't be active for more than 50 games, but they're not eligible to be put on the playoff roster. So if you feel like you can put together a pretty good playoff roster without Cam Spencer, which the Grizzlies should be able to do this season, you can hold out on that one. Scottie Pippen Jr. and Jay Huff is a little bit different. Scottie Pippen Jr. and Jay Huff, both, I think this is the last year they can be on two-way deals. So going into next season, they can't be on two-way deals anymore. So if you feel like Scottie Pippen Jr., who's going to be, in his third season in the NBA, who's shown promising signs, a lot of you know how I feel about Scottie Pippen Jr. We talked about how he played through Summer League. That is an option to add some depth to the point guard spot. Jay Huff, we talked about the depth issues at center as well. He is an option as well. So that's the first option I want to go. Promote a guy from a two-way contract. Then the second option, add a depth piece. Simple. Pretty much what I was just saying about Scottie Pippen Jr. and Jay Huff. But this time you just go get a veteran, go get a player with some experience, go into free agency maybe, and you go sign a veteran piece that, maybe a physical big, for example, because, if you get real nitpicky about the Grizzlies' big center situation, they have a variety of options. You got Jaren Jackson Jr., who can slide down to the 5. You have Zach Edey, who's going to play the 5. You have Brandon Clark. Those are the three guys who are probably on your standard roster right now who are going to play minutes at center. But like I said, you want to get nitpicky? I can get nitpicky. And if I wanted to be nitpicky, I say, Zach Edey's a rookie. I like him. But am I dependent on a rookie, for 30 minutes? I don't know. Then you say, okay, Jaren Jackson Jr. Well, we've had that whole talk about Jaren Jackson Jr. at the 5. Sure, he can be productive there, but at the same time, you have to be okay with, one, you're not going to be a good rebounding team. 2, his block shots is going to go down drastically. So as long as you're okay with those two things, put Jaren at the 5. But a lot of people are not okay with those two things. And then Brandon Clark, solid numbers at the 5 and whatnot, but he's undersized. So, yeah, he'll work out in those matchups when you're playing the mobile guys, the Karl Anthony Towns, when he slides down to the 5. But what about when you go against Rudy Gobert? What about when you're going against Jokic? What about when you're going against Zubac? You think Brandon Clark can hold his own? He probably can, but I'm not trusting him in those situations to go win me a series. Anthony Davis as well, like going against those type guys. So with all that being said, it makes sense. Like if you want to add a depth piece at center, okay, yeah, go get another big physical guy who can hold his own in there. So like, yeah, okay, Zachy's going through some rookie bumps or whatever. No sweat. Like you still got Jaren, you still got Brandon Clark, but you also have another physical big that you can throw into the equation as well. So adding a depth piece potentially at center, potentially at point guard also makes sense to me. A cheap option that could possibly keep them under the tax as well. And then there's the third option. And the third option to me is keeping the spot open. Just don't do anything right now. Just give yourself the option of, hey, we'll sit back, see how things play out, and whatever the case may be. So those are the three options. And I'm going to say pretty firmly here, I think I said the best option for last. I say the best for last. I think the Grizzlies should keep the spot open and stand firm. I know, we're in this age where we want transactions. We want the Grizzlies. We want to say, oh, go get this guy. Go get that guy. Promote this guy for a two-way deal. None of that has to happen right now. Quite frankly, the Grizzlies' rotation is pretty much solidified. So if you're talking about adding a player to the roster, whether it's from one of the two-way guys, whether it's an outside free agent, it's probably not going to be someone who's just going to jump into the rotation. Like the one guy who has that opportunity is Scottie Pippen Jr. is to back up the job. But, that's another conversation for another day. That's the one guy who has that opportunity. I could see that if he's the option. But at the same time, I'm still willing to keep that spot open to give yourself some flexibility. And what do I mean by flexibility? What if the Grizzlies get in a situation early in the season where some depth issues come into play? A couple guards get hurt or, one of the centers. Like, that's where it could really come. Like, one of the centers go down and, Zach Edey sprains an ankle again or Jaren Jackson Jr. or something happens up in the front court. You want to be in a position where you can say, oh, we don't have to waive anybody. We don't have to. Let's just go sign Bismack Biyombo, like the Grizzlies did. And if you remember when Bismack Biyombo came here, when he first got to the Grizzlies, he was a spark. That first 4 or 5 games, the Grizzlies moved him into the starting lineup for a reason. He was a spark. Now, eventually, the book got out, as they like to say, and, that spark kind of calmed down a little bit. But what all they said, he was a spark, and there are some, free agents who can kind of serve that type of role. So that's the best option to me because it's not even just in case of an injury. What if you get to the trade deadline? Right? We talked about the idea of the Grizzlies going for it. Now you put yourself in a position where you could take a 2-for-1 trade. And a lot of teams will have 15-man rosters at that point. So they might not be able to, take on an extra contract without automatically having to waive a guy and eat the money for no reason or whatever the case may be. The Grizzlies could be in a position where, hey, we'll trade you one guy. You bring us 2 back. And it will still solidify their roster. So, again, having the flexibility to be able to do either one of those things makes a lot of sense to me. Because at the end of the day, it's this simple. I think if you feel that 15 spot right now, you're just feeling it just to feel it. You might as well go get a Udonis Haslem or one of those type vets. Like, that player is probably not going to play much, if any. So it's not and it's not an uncommon thing. You see a lot of teams go into the NBA season carrying 14 players. It wouldn't have been, ideal for the Grizzlies last season, but last season was a historical, year with the Grizzlies with injuries. But in the previous years, it would have made sense. Like the 15 guy doesn't really play a lot. It's just the reality of the situation. So I don't think the Grizzlies have to go out and address that right now. Let me know what you guys think, though. If you're on YouTube, let me know in the comments. If you're not on YouTube, let me know wherever else you want to let me know, too, because you can find me on X at Damichael C. Let me know what you guys think. Should the Grizzlies go out? Should they promote a Scottie Pippen Jr.? Look, people know how I feel about Scottie Pippen Jr., but I've said from the jump, the Grizzlies have him for 50 active games. 50 active games. Maybe that's the option. That's why I say you keep it open as well, because maybe Scottie Pippen Jr. regresses. But if he doesn't regress, if he continues to play like the player that I think he is, then okay, easy decision. You get closer to the 50-game mark, you got an open spot, you promote him, now you have an open two-way slot, boom, done deal. So a bunch of different routes the Grizzlies can go with addressing that 15 spot. Let me know what you guys think as well. But thank you guys for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies on today and making it your first listen of the day. For your second listen, make sure you enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast. There is no podcast because there is no offseason in the NBA. Listen, there's no offseason in the NBA, and Locked On NBA is the podcast that provides the daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed and entertained as Locked On NBA. It's available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Coming up here on Locked On Grizzlies, Ziaire Williams made his first public comments on the Grizzlies since being traded. We're going to talk about that here next on Locked On Grizzlies. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies, everyone. I'm Damichael Cole, beat writer for the Commercial Appeal here in Memphis, Tennessee. Thank you guys for tuning in with me on today. Today's juicy episode. We don't get a lot of episodes like this in August where we just got a lot of things to run through. But that's what today's show is giving us. And, that's the good thing about being in this business for somebody like myself, because the news never stops. Like, it might slow down a little bit, but the news just never comes to a halt unless there's a pandemic or something. But I digress. That's my one I digress for the day. Shout out to my guy, Joe Mullinax. Ziaire Williams. Let's talk about him real quick, because I think Joe did the show solo after Ziaire Williams was traded and whatnot. And many of you are familiar with my up and downs with how I felt about Ziaire. In the simplest form, I felt like he was a solid fit when he played alongside of Ja Morant. Ja was great at finding, Ziaire Williams as a lob threat and just knowing his game. But I thought he was an imperfect fit in other ways as well. There were reasons, and then there were the injuries. Like, there is a lot to kind of unpack with what really happened with Ziaire Williams in his time in Memphis. And the first thing that stands out to me is the injuries, right? Like, he played 62 games in his rookie year. And his rookie season was his best season, over 8 points per game. I talked about how efficient he was from the field, 45% shooting overall, but he had the second highest 2-point field goal percentage on that team. Only Brandon Clark was better. He was better at shooting twos than Steven Adams. It's because he had a simplified game as a rookie. He knew his role. Yeah, I'm going to go catch some lobs, and I'm going to shoot these mid-range jumpers, and I'm going to play my game. But then as you get into year two, what happens? Teams say, hey, we want you to expand your game now. And the Grizzlies sent Ziaire Williams to Summer League. And if you guys remember, the whole idea, they put him on the ball and they wanted him to be more of this big playmaker. It was basically the Desmond Bane experience reincarnated. After Desmond Bane's rookie year, the Grizzlies sent him to Summer League, basically allowed him to play on the ball, and it helped Desmond Bane tremendously. It's the reason why Desmond Bane probably is going to spend a lot of time as the Grizzlies de facto backup point guard at some point this season. Like when Ja's out of the game, he's going to be the guy who takes over because he has grown significantly, leaps and bounds as a secondary and primary playmaker. So the Grizzlies kind of had the same idea for Ziaire Williams, but didn't work like that. Did not work like that. It just wasn't, very conducive to his skill set, and it felt forced for a little bit. And then there was the whole thing with the three-point shooting. Ziaire, I remember someone told me this. Someone said, look, I was watching Ziaire Williams in high school. I watched him in college. And he was never a really good three-point shooter. And it hit me. Yeah, that's true. I mean, he has a nice, solid, compact form. But Ziaire Williams is never, in high school, his 1 year at Stanford, there was nothing on film that said that guy's going to be a 37, 38% three-point shooter in the NBA at some point. And the fact that he's come to the NBA and he's had 2 seasons where he's hovered around 30% and 1 season where he shot below 30% from three-point range, that's just kind of who he is at this point. Like, it's not, he's struggling because of the injuries, he's not getting in a rhythm. That's who Ziaire Williams is as a three-point shooter. Ziaire Williams told me himself that mid-range game is his bread and butter. If you watch him shoot mid-range jumpers, especially his rookie year, it was automatic. Like, when I saw him shoot mid-range jumpers, I was surprised when they didn't go in. But as the Grizzlies kind of emphasize expanding his game, There was this bigger emphasis on 3-point shots, and that's just not who he is. So in a way, I think I said it on the show on Locked On Grizzlies. It was like, look, if that's who the Grizzlies want him to be, it's not going to work. If the Grizzlies don't say, hey, look, man, we want you to be, we want your shot chart to look like, for lack of, a better comp, a DeMar DeRozan's. Get in that mid-range where you thrive every now and then. Okay, throw up a three-pointer to let them know they can't just sag off of you and guard you, at the free throw line. But you should live in the mid-range. That's your bread and butter. That's your most efficient area of the floor other than inside the restricted area. Get to that mid-range. Get to your bread and butter. And let's expand your game from there after you have pretty much become a bona fide lethal mid-range scorer. He never was able to become that player because we took the last couple of years, I think pretty much half of Ziaire Williams' shots have come from three-point range, and that was never going to work. So the fit in Memphis that was that. The Grizzlies have this let it fly mentality. Everyone has the green light. Steven Adams had the green light while he was here. Jaren, Santi. I'm pretty sure Zach E's going to have a green light as well if he wants to shoot it. Is he going to shoot it? Probably not. But he's going to have that green light. Taylor Jenkins wants guys to have that freedom. And Ziaire Williams had that freedom as well. Didn't really work out. But Ziaire Williams spoke about the Memphis experience, and there were a lot of notable takeaways. In an interview with Hoops Hype, one of the first things that stood out to me in that interview was, the interviewer asked Ziaire Williams, was he caught off guard? Was he caught off guard by the fact that the Memphis Grizzlies decided to trade him? And he basically said that no, he was not caught off guard because Zach Kleiman, and this is the first time we heard this about Zach Kleiman. It's just actually a pretty commonly thing said about Zach Kleiman. Zach Kleiman kept him in the loop throughout the process, and if you're familiar with that process, Ziaire Williams' name was pretty much mentioned in trade rumors for a while. So he had an idea that it was coming, but here's his quote on when the trade stuff happened. He said, when it happens, it's always like, damn, it's real now. Like I said, man, I'm happy for the opportunity, and I'm grateful for what I experienced in Memphis. And I'm just looking forward to this next chapter in my life. So that was pretty much his comments on that. But the rest of the interview, you could tell, he figured that his downfall in Memphis was just not being healthy. And, his rookie year felt good about Ziaire, right? And then he comes into the second year. He's dealing with injuries earlier in the year. And then later in the year, then he gets demoted to the Memphis, G League hustle. And then after his second season, people are saying, okay, Ziaire Williams is about to go to Summer League again. Going into his third year, but this is going to be a big opportunity for him. The Grizzlies even said it, at media days, at the exit interviews, after Zaire's second season, that, the plan is for him to go to Summer League. And then Summer League gets here. We're watching the Grizzlies in Summer League. For one, Ziaire Williams wasn't on the roster. Then he shows up to Vegas. He has nice outfits on. Grizzlies X or Grizzlies Twitter at the time kind of goes a little wild. Like, why? How dare Ziaire Williams show up and just sit over there when he's supposed to be playing? But later we came to find out that it was kind of a management thing. With his need, the Grizzlies, Ziaire Williams kind of decided that it was best for his career, and he only he came back, played I think 51 games this past season. And as soon as it felt like he got into a rhythm, I think it was like in February, he got hurt again, the back injury, and which he described in this same article with Hoops Hype. Basically said he was on bed rest for like 2 weeks. Like his teammates would have to help him up, and they were bringing him food and things like that. So it's been a trying past 2 years. It just wasn't the right time. It was just the right situation. And in those 2 years that Ziaire Williams was struggling with inconsistencies in his game and just staying on the floor, G.G. Jackson emerged. Vince Williams emerged. And suddenly Ziaire Williams became that much more expendable. But getting back to, part about staying on the court, I think he's emphasizing that a lot going forward in his career. It will be interesting to see, what that results in, because he basically said, when you're on the court, you get rhythm. You're feeling good, and things are a lot easier. So that's why I'm just really trying to work on my body and make sure that I'm available. Availability is the best ability. So as long as I got that, everything else will take care of itself. Words from Ziaire Williams. So good luck to Ziaire Williams the rest of his career. When the Grizzlies go to Brooklyn, I'm going to keep up with them. I want to see, what Ziaire Williams has to say about his experience in Memphis. So looking forward to chronicling that as well. But thank you guys for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies Day. Make sure you tune in Friday as well as we come back to you. It's going to be me again solo. So if you enjoyed this solo episode with me on today, make sure you come back Friday. Or Joe Molex gets another deserved day off. We got a lot more things to talk about. Maybe we'll talk about some things over at ESPN. Usually it's Joe going on the rants, so I'll say that for him. But we're gonna talk about some recent announcements, some survey announcements, basically what the Grizzlies think about. What some NBA executives think about the Grizzlies this upcoming season, and we might have a couple other special things for you as well. You never know, so make sure you just tune in to Locked On Grizzlies to find out what that could be. Thank you again for making Locked On your first listen today. Locked On Grizzlies, that is. But remember, go check out the Locked On NBA podcast because it's where the season never ends. Provide a national expertise with a local perspective. You can find the link to the Locked On NBA podcast in the description. So you don't need to search for it. You don't need to go to Google and say, hey, where can I find the Locked On NBA podcast? It's right here in the description on this show. So make sure you just go look at that because it's part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Thank you guys for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies with me today. And we'll be back with you on Friday. But until then, remember that Locked On Grizzlies is free and available wherever you get your podcast. Until next time, I'm Damichael Cole, and we'll see you on Locked On Grizzlies.